Well, hello there. Pastor Daniel here at Church of the Redeemer. We are a Reformed Evangelical Presbyterian congregation here in Cortland, New York. We'd love to have you come worship with us on a Lord's Day. Well, Happy New Year. It's 2021, and we're going to resume our time in the Westminster Confession of Faith. Been off for, I think, almost 2 months, but with all the holidays and all that. But let's just get right back into it. And I think the chapter today in the confession is really relevant for the main struggle that we're probably all, working through, and that is God in control? Is God in control of all things? And the chapter today in the confession is on God's providence, God's works of His providence, or His governing and ruling over all things. And that's a question we all have been asking, even if you're not really a religious person. Maybe you've asked, is someone in control of what's going on with this pandemic and civil unrest and other things? So I think there's actually some good news and some good gospel in this part of the confession. So I'm going to start off with the first couple of sections and just read it and read to you maybe even what the Catechism says about providence, and we'll just work from there. So you can look online or look in an actual copy of the confession here and just follow along. So chapter 5 of the confession, start with section 1. It says that God, the great creator of all things, does uphold and directs and dispose and govern all creatures and their actions and things, from the greatest even to the least, by His most wise and holy providence, according to His infallible knowledge, in the free and immutable counsel of His own will, all to the praise of the glory of His wisdom, power, justice, goodness, and mercy. This kind of follows along with clarification about God's foreknowledge. Does God overrule all things because He knows it first, or did He decree it? So section 2 says, although in relation to the foreknowledge and decree of God, the first cause of all things comes to pass immutably and infallibly, yet by the same providence He orders them to fall out according to the nature of second causes, either necessarily, freely, or contingently. That's actually a really good point. God does not ordain or rule over all things in the same manner. So, for example, we may say that the way that God rules over maybe someone's salvation and the work of what we call regeneration, with a spirit, God's Holy Spirit actively can change the heart of a person. We'll look at a chapter on regeneration later. That's not the same when it comes to the seasons or rainfall or snow or sunshine, governed secondarily, contingently by the laws of nature, which God, as the first cause, has set up. Does that make sense? Now, there have been some who've said, no, God directly and actively is involved with every act in the same manner. Jonathan Edwards kind of said this, but the confession doesn't go this route. It says it kind of respects the notion of natural laws and laws of physics and nature. It's not deism. It doesn't say that God just created the world and kind of spun it like a top and just kind of left it alone. No, God is active in this world, but He's active in different ways regarding various facets of this world. But here's the good news of this. It means that we can believe in the integrity of science. We can believe in cause and effect and laws of nature and things of that sort. Otherwise, you probably couldn't believe in things like cause and effect and laws of induction and things of that sort. So I think it's just really good clarity from the confession. Section 3, God in His ordinary providence makes use of means, and yet is free to work without, above, and against them at His pleasure. So that's just saying God can work above or against the means. So God can perform miracles, right? Like resurrection from the dead, or virgin births, and things of that nature. Section 4. The almighty power and unsearchable wisdom and His infinite goodness of God so far manifest themselves in His providence that extends itself even to the first fall and all other sins of angels and men, and that not by the bare permission, but such as He has joined it with the most wise and powerful bounding and otherwise ordering and governing of them in a manifold dispensation, to His own holy ends, yet so as the sinfulness thereof proceeds only from the creature and not from God, who being most holy and righteous neither is or can be the author or approver of sin. So here's what's going on here. Look at the issue of the fall. Did God decree that the fall happened? Was it God's choice? Was he a cause of that? And in one sense, the answer is yes, but in such a way that God's not the author of sin. We are the author of sin. But I love this part, and there's a mystery to this. You really can't explain all the mechanical ins and outs of this. But it says that God had his own holy ends in allowing the fall. And someone like Augustine and others called this is a Latin phrase, they called this "O felix culpa," "O happy fall." In that, you know what, there are holy ends to God not just allowing the fall to happen, because it's not just by bare permission, but God decrees it. What was the holy end of allowing even the fall of sin to happen? Well, we get these greater goods like the incarnation of Jesus and the atonement of Jesus, which we would have not otherwise experience apart from the fall. And so here's the question that I would put to you: what is a better world? A world that experiences no fall, and just we remain in paradise forever, or a world that experiences the fall but also experiences the incarnation and atonement? We would say that perhaps the incarnation, the atonement of Jesus, and that fellowship with Jesus in that manner, to be redeemed, is a sweet and good pleasure that it is worth. The fall was worth experiencing those greater goods. So those were the holy ends of God, even in decreeing the fall. And so just some scripture verses about God's providence. I start with the Proverbs. Proverbs 16:33 says that even the dice, even the lot that's cast into the lap, every decision is from the Lord. So you go to Vegas, you go to one of the casinos here in New York State, and it's technically God's decree that's in control of all things. Don't tell the casinos that. But then everything from the dice, but also to the king in his heart. So we just had a Georgia Senate runoff last night, I think, and but politicians, their hearts are in God's hands. So Proverbs 21:1, the king's heart is a stream of water in the hand of the Lord, and God turns it wherever he wills. And then Daniel chapter 4 kind of gives a broader view of God's providence over all things. Says that his dominion is an everlasting dominion. His kingdom endures from generation to generation. All the inhabitants of the earth are counted as nothing. He does according to his will among the hosts of heaven, among the inhabitants of the earth, and none can stay or prevent his hand, or say to him, "What have you done?" Also, just kind of maybe one last verse here. Actually, two more verses. Psalm 135:6. Pretty simple verse. Whatever the Lord pleases, he does, in heaven and on earth, in the seas and all the deep. So God does all his holy will. Ephesians 1:11 kind of says the same thing there. And then finally, Acts 17. This is Paul's speech at Mars Hill, doing some apologetics. But here's what he says in verse 25 and 26 about God. Actually, start at verse 24. The God who made the world and everything in it, being the Lord of heaven and earth, does not live in temples made by man, nor is he served by human hands as though he needs anything, since he gives to all mankind life and breath and everything. So all that we experience comes from God. That's God's providence. And he made from one man every nation of mankind to live on all the face of the earth, and having determined their allotted periods and boundaries of their dwelling places. So wherever you live, how long you've lived there, it's all part of God's providence. And that involves a million decisions, a million small kind of free will issues, right? I think a really good kind of short summary of what is God's providence is found in the Catechism. So this is the larger Catechism, question 18. I think it's the same question in the shorter Catechism, question 11. The question is, what are God's works of providence? And the answer is, God's works of providence are his most holy, wise, and powerful, preserving and governing all his creatures, ordering them in all their actions to his own glory. So God's providence involves his wisdom and his holiness. So we have a good God. we have a big God theology, but we have a good God who's also a big God. And so we're not fatalists. We don't think we're robots. We don't think that we should be worried that God's in control of everything. But it's a holy and a wise God, a good God who governs all their creatures and all their actions. And that's good news for us, especially in a place like this world in 2020, now 2021. God is a good God and He's in control, which is why we can pray to Him, right? But this gets even more practical, kind of zeroes down into how God's providence interacts with us on a day-to-day basis. So, section 5, listen to this. The most wise, righteous, and gracious God does oftentimes leave for a season His own children to experience manifold temptations and the corruption of their own hearts, to chastise them for their former sins, or to discover unto them the hidden strength of corruption and deceitfulness of their hearts, that they may be humbled, and to raise them to a more close and constant dependence for their support upon Himself, and to make them more watchful against future occasions of sin, and for sundry other just and holy ends. So, can God, in one sense, He does not lead us into temptation. He does not lead us into sin. But God, in His providence, may let us experience temptation. And so maybe you can think of someone who, who's an alcoholic. Someone struggles with alcohol most of their lives. Maybe a Christian who is trying to live faithfully to Jesus in their sexuality, but they experience same-sex attraction, and that's probably not going to go away. That's a temptation that in God's providence they're being dealt with. You can think of all other issues, money, greed, power, or poverty, so many issues. But why does God do this? God is wise, righteous, and gracious in doing this. And He's trying to help us be humbled and to give us a more close dependence upon Himself. So you can use maybe Paul's, his thorn in the flesh. Why did God give Paul that mysterious thorn in the flesh? So that He may show Paul that God's grace is sufficient for Paul. And so that's the same with all of us in our walks and our struggles with various sinful temptations. We're just called to be faithful. The temptations may never go away. Don't think that because you still have temptation that means you're still doing something wrong. That's not a good way to think about our spirituality and our Christian life. But the experience of temptation is God's holy and wise providence to humble you and draw you closer to Jesus. And so that's a good kind of perspective to view temptation and struggles even in the Christian life. The last couple sections, let's just kind of knock it out here. As for wicked and ungodly men, whom God, as a righteous judge, for former sins does blind and harden, from them He not only withholds His grace, whereby they may have been enlightened in their understandings and wrought upon in their hearts, but sometimes also withdraws the gifts which they had, and exposes them to such objects as their corruption, and make occasion of sin, and withal gives them over to their own lusts, the temptations of the world, and the power of Satan, whereby it comes to pass that they harden themselves even under those means which God uses for the softening of others. So this section is thinking of texts like Romans 9 and Romans chapter 1. Probably hear those texts in this section. Also, just in the book of Exodus, and God, where it says that God hardened Pharaoh's heart, but other times it says that Pharaoh hardened his own heart. And then also sometimes says that Pharaoh's heart was hardened, or his heart hardened itself. So there's this kind of mysterious interaction between kind of God's providence and our willing. And again, I think I've said this before, how does a infinite, eternal, divine being and His will interact with the wills of finite, temporal creatures? What's the mechanics of that? That sounds way more complicated than any form of calculus or physics in this world. We'll never be able to figure this out, but we should just affirm it because the Bible affirms it. The final section, very short, section 7. As the providence of God does in general reach to all creatures, so after, in a special manner, it takes care of His church, and disposes all things to the good thereof. And Jesus says the gates of hell will not prevail against his church. Isn't that amazing? That 2,000 years after Jesus said that this church, this seed of the kingdom, will become the biggest tree in the world, that this leaven will rise up into this big dough, and 2,000 years later, the largest visible organization in the world is the Church of Jesus Christ. Even amidst persecution, even still around the world, the church often grows the quickest in places where it's being persecuted. And so, that's God's work of providence. So it's true. I hope this gives you some comfort with 2021. If you're feeling unrest about social issues or political issues or the pandemic, when will things get back to normal? We have a holy and wise God we can trust. And so that's good news for us. So we should teach this in the church. We should teach a big God theology that his providence is good news for humanity. So, and that's something that Reformed Presbyterian churches love to teach a lot, because it's kind of a big part of our theology and our tradition. So, hope you enjoyed that. Hope you've had a safe, Happy New Year. Let's kind of get through these next few months of this pandemic, and hopefully we'll pray by God's providence things get a little bit back to normal. Take care of yourselves, and God bless.